A cigarette boat cuts through black water at 40 knots. No navigation lights, no radio chatter. Just the muffled roar of engines and the phosphorescent wake disappearing into darkness. Somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrowest maritime choke point on Earth, a decision is being made that will redefine the rules of engagement in contested waters. In this hypothetical scenario, we explore what happens when elite forces collide in an environment where every sensor ping, every radio transmission, and every second of hesitation can mean the difference between mission success and strategic catastrophe. This is not about who wins a firefight. This is about understanding the invisible architecture of modern maritime special operations, where the ocean itself becomes both weapon and shield, and where the most dangerous threat is often the one you never see coming. Here is what most people misunderstand about special operations in maritime environments. The mission is never just about the operators, it is about sensor networks that stretch across 3 dimensions. Communication protocols that must work through saltwater and electromagnetic interference, extraction timing that depends on tides and lunar cycles, and political constraints that can change the rules of engagement mid-mission. The United States Navy SEALs, specifically the component known as Naval Special Warfare Development Group, operate within a doctrine that treats the ocean as an information space first and a physical battlefield second. Iran's Quds Force, the External Operations Division of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, understands this same principle from the opposite direction. They do not need to match American technological superiority. They need to make the ocean so complicated, so saturated with false signals and ambiguous threats, that even the most advanced sensors cannot provide clean targeting data. So when we ask what happens when these two forces collide, we are really asking a different question. How do you conduct precision operations in an environment designed to defeat precision? The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. 30% of the world's seaborne oil passes through this corridor every single day. The water depth varies from 300 feet in the shipping lanes to less than 60 feet near the coastline. The seabed is not sand, it is a mixture of rock, coral, and ancient sediment that creates complex acoustic reflections. Surface temperatures in summer exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The water is dense with salt, which bends sonar waves in unpredictable ways. There are thermoclines, layers where temperature changes abruptly, that can hide submarines or create phantom contacts on acoustic displays. This is not an empty ocean. This is a battlefield that has been prepared over decades. Iran has placed acoustic sensors along the seabed. They have prepositioned small arms caches on uninhabited islands. They have mapped every current, every reef, every shipping route. They know exactly which corridors allow fast boats to approach undetected by radar. They know where the thermoclines form at different times of year. They know which frequencies will propagate through the water and which will be absorbed. This environmental knowledge is a weapon system in itself. Now, here is the trade-off that most analysis misses. The same complexity that helps Iran hide their assets also makes it harder for them to coordinate their own forces. Communication in this environment is never guaranteed. Line-of-sight radio works, but it can be jammed or intercepted. Underwater acoustic communication is slow and vulnerable to noise. Satellite communication requires exposing an antenna, which can be detected and targeted. So both sides are operating partially blind, using doctrine and pre-planned contingencies rather than real-time coordination. Iran's Quds Force does not operate like a conventional military. They operate like a network. Their maritime assets in the strait include fast attack craft equipped with rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns, swimmer delivery vehicles that can infiltrate harbors, and command nodes disguised as fishing vessels or commercial traffic. But the real threat is not any single platform. The real threat is their ability to blend into the background noise of one of the busiest waterways on Earth. On any given day, there are hundreds of small boats in the strait. Fishermen, smugglers, cargo dhows, pleasure craft, ferries. Most are legitimate. Some are surveillance platforms gathering electromagnetic signatures and photographing Western naval vessels. A few are pre-positioned for direct action, waiting for the signal to arm and execute. The doctrine is simple but effective. I do not challenge American forces directly unless necessary. Instead, shape the environment so that American decision-makers face only bad options. If United States Navy vessels want to intercept a suspicious boat, they must send a boarding team, which exposes those sailors to potential ambush. If they want to maintain standoff distance, they lose the ability to verify whether a contact is actually hostile. If they use active sonar to search for underwater threats, they announce their position to every sensor in the area. This is asymmetric warfare at the operational level. You do not need to sink an aircraft carrier. You just need to make the carrier battle group commit resources to low-level threats, forcing them to operate in a way that increases risk and decreases flexibility. But here is what the textbooks do not tell you. This strategy has a hidden cost. By blending in with civilian traffic, Quds Force assets put those civilians at risk. By using hospitals and mosques as command centers, they invite scrutiny of protected sites. By operating in this gray zone between peace and war, they make every engagement a potential international incident. So the question becomes, in a hypothetical scenario where shooting actually starts, can they escalate fast enough to achieve their objective before the political cost becomes unbearable? Naval Special Warfare Development Group operates under a different set of constraints. Their missions are typically classified at the highest levels. Their rules of engagement are specific and legally reviewed. Their operators train for years in environments that simulate exactly this kind of complexity. When a SEAL team enters hostile or contested waters, they are not operating alone. They are the tip of a much larger system. Overhead, there may be electronic warfare aircraft monitoring radio frequencies and providing jamming support. Offshore, there are surface vessels ready to provide fire support or extraction. Underwater, there may be swimmer delivery vehicles or mini-submarines designed to insert and extract teams without breaking the surface. And in space, there are satellites providing imagery, signals intelligence, and secure communication links. The doctrine for maritime special operations is built around the concept of layered security. The first layer is stealth. Do not be detected. The second layer is deception. If detected, appear to be something else. The third layer is speed. If identified as hostile, complete the mission before the enemy can respond. The fourth layer is overwhelming force. If resistance is encountered, bring enough firepower to suppress it immediately and extract safely. But every layer has a trade-off. Stealth requires slow movement and electronic silence, which limits coordination. Deception requires props and rehearsal, which adds time and complexity. Speed requires risk, pushing equipment and people to their limits. Overwhelming force requires logistics, pre-positioning assets that might themselves become targets. So when we imagine a hypothetical scenario where Quds Force assets fire first on a SEAL team, we need to understand that this is not a fair fight in the traditional sense. The SEALs are almost certainly outnumbered at the point of contact, but they are connected to a kill chain that can call in airstrikes, naval gunfire, and electronic warfare support within minutes. The question is whether those minutes are fast enough. Now, this is where the scenario gets truly complex. Imagine a SEAL team conducting a reconnaissance mission near an Iranian island. Their objective is to gather intelligence on weapons shipments, photograph facilities, maybe plant acoustic sensors. The mission is covert. The rules of engagement say they can defend themselves but should avoid contact if possible. They approach in a rigid hull inflatable boat, low profile, no lights, using night vision and GPS. They are 2 miles from the objective when a cigarette boat appears from behind an island outcropping. The boat is fast, maybe 50 knots, and it is heading directly toward them. Now the SEAL team faces an immediate decision. Is this boat hostile? Is it even aware of them? If they turn away, they abort the mission and risk exposing their presence. If they continue, they risk getting close enough that the boat can engage effectively. If they prepare to fire, they might escalate a situation that could still be resolved peacefully. This is the decision compression that defines modern special operations. You have seconds to make a choice that will be analyzed for months. The doctrine says you assess intent through observable actions. Is the boat maneuvering to intercept? Are weapons visible? Is there radio traffic suggesting coordination with other assets? But in darkness at high speed, with adrenaline spiking? These assessments are difficult. And here's the part that changes everything. The cigarette boat is not just a boat. It is a probe. Quds Force doctrine uses these high-speed intercepts to test response times, to gather intelligence on American tactics, and to create situations where any response looks like escalation. If the SEAL team fires first, Iran can claim they attacked a civilian vessel. If the SEAL team waits and the boat is hostile, they might not survive the first burst of fire. This is the trap. There is no clean option. Let us assume in this hypothetical scenario that the cigarette boat opens fire first. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, the distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds passing overhead. The SEAL team returns fire immediately. The engagement lasts maybe 20 seconds. One SEAL is hit, non-fatal but serious. The cigarette boat turns away, trailing smoke. And now the real operation begins. Because everything that happens next will be recorded, analyzed, and used by both sides to shape the narrative. The SEAL team calls in the contact report. Within seconds, the information is relayed to the task force commander, to United States Central Command, to the Pentagon, and to the White House Situation Room. Overhead, an MQ-9 Reaper drone that has been orbiting at 20,000 feet redirects its sensors to provide video feed. A P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, operating from a base in the Gulf, starts moving toward the area to provide additional surveillance and electronic warfare support. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, part of the carrier strike group operating in the Gulf of Oman, goes to general quarters and prepares to launch helicopters. This is not just a response to the attack. This is the activation of a pre-planned escalation ladder. Each step has been rehearsed. Each decision point has been war-gamed. But here's what makes this scenario different from the rehearsals. Iran is also activating their response plan. Quds Force commanders are alerting their coastal defense units. Anti-ship missile batteries, hidden in tunnels and reinforced bunkers along the coast, are being brought to ready status. Fast attack craft are leaving their piers, dispersing to pre-planned positions. And Iranian media is already broadcasting that American commandos have conducted an unprovoked attack on civilian fishermen in Iranian territorial waters. The narrative battle starts before the shooting stops. While the SEAL team is extracting their wounded operator and moving to a pickup point, something else is happening in the electromagnetic spectrum. American electronic warfare systems are monitoring Iranian radio traffic. They are looking for patterns that indicate command and control, for frequencies that might be used to coordinate a follow-up attack, for any signal that suggests this was a planned ambush rather than a chance encounter. What they discover is both reassuring and concerning. The Iranian communications are fragmented. Different units are using different frequencies. There is confusion about whether the engagement was authorized or whether a local commander acted independently. This suggests that the Iranian response is not fully coordinated, which reduces the immediate threat. But it also means that the situation could escalate unpredictably because no one on the Iranian side has complete control. Meanwhile, the United States is making its own calculations. Do they announce the incident publicly, framing it as Iranian aggression? Do they keep it classified, avoiding the political complications but also losing the opportunity to shape the narrative? Do they respond with a show of force, sailing additional ships into the strait to demonstrate resolve? Or do they de-escalate, withdrawing forces to reduce tensions? Each option has consequences. Publicity might deter future attacks but could also pressure Iran to respond more aggressively to avoid looking weak. Keeping it quiet might allow back-channel diplomacy to work, but could embolden Iran to continue testing American resolve. A show of force might prevent escalation through strength, but could also be seen as provocative, especially by regional allies who want stability. De-escalation might reduce immediate risk but could signal weakness, inviting further probes. This is the strategic paralysis that asymmetric tactics are designed to create. There is no perfect response. Now here is the dimension that rarely gets discussed in these scenarios. Every time a situation like this occurs, it burns intelligence sources and methods. The fact that the United States knew where to look for Iranian assets reveals something about their surveillance network. The speed of the response reveals something about their readiness posture. The tactics used by the SEAL team, even in a brief firefight, provide information that adversaries can use to predict future operations. Iran will analyze every aspect of the engagement. What weapons did the Americans use? What was their formation? And how long did it take them to call for support? What kind of support arrived? All of this information goes into their threat assessment and influences how they will prepare for the next encounter. Similarly, the United States will analyze Iranian tactics. What type of boat was used? What weapons? What was the level of training of the crew? Were they trying to kill or just probe? Was there a support network nearby? This intelligence feeds into the next iteration of American planning. But here's the catch. Both sides know that the other side is learning, so both sides start using deception. The Americans might deliberately use older equipment or less sophisticated tactics in some encounters, saving their best capabilities for situations where they have no choice. The Iranians might deliberately appear less coordinated than they actually are, setting up future operations where they can surprise the Americans with their actual level of capability. This creates an intelligence arms race where both sides are constantly trying to see through the other's deception while maintaining their own. And the cost of this race is measured not just in dollars but in risk. Every time you hold back your best capabilities to preserve their secrecy, you increase the danger to the forces in the field. Every time you use your best capabilities, you risk revealing them to the adversary. In the hours after the engagement, a different kind of operation begins. Damage assessment, legal review, political messaging. The wounded SEAL is evacuated to a field hospital, then transferred to a military medical center in Germany for surgery. His condition becomes part of the political calculation. If he dies, the pressure for retaliation increases dramatically. If he survives, it is easier to frame the incident as a successful defense, rather than a loss that demands a response. The task force commander writes a detailed after-action report. What were the rules of engagement? Were they followed? What was the threat level before the engagement? What intelligence suggested Iranian activity in the area? This report will be reviewed by lawyers, by intelligence analysts, by senior military officers, and by civilian policymakers. Every decision will be scrutinized. Meanwhile, Iran is conducting its own assessment. Did they achieve their objective? If the objective was simply to harass American forces and demonstrate that they can operate in contested waters, then maybe the mission was successful despite the damaged boat. If the objective was to test American response times and capabilities, then they gathered valuable intelligence even though they took casualties. If the objective was to force a political crisis, then the outcome depends on how the Americans respond. This is the calculus of asymmetric warfare. Victory is not defined by who inflicts more casualties. Victory is defined by who achieves their political objectives at an acceptable cost. And the definition of acceptable cost can shift dramatically depending on domestic politics, international pressure, and the strategic environment. So what does this hypothetical scenario actually teach us about modern maritime special operations? First, the environment matters more than the platform. The most advanced technology in the world cannot eliminate the basic physics of water, the complexity of littoral zones, or the fog of war created by operating in a crowded maritime space. Second, asymmetric forces do not need to win in the traditional sense. They just need to make victory expensive enough that the stronger power decides the objective is not worth the cost. Third, information dominance is not the same as information certainty. You can have the best sensors, the most sophisticated analysis, and real-time communication, and still face situations where the right decision is not clear. Fourth, every tactical engagement has strategic consequences. What happens in a 20-second firefight between a SEAL team and an Iranian boat can influence policy decisions in Washington, Tehran, and capitals around the world. Fifth, the most dangerous moment is not when shooting starts. It is when both sides commit to courses of action that make de-escalation difficult without one side accepting a loss of face. And finally, the ocean does not care about your doctrine. It has its own rules, its own patterns, its own ways of revealing or concealing what is happening beneath the surface. The side that understands this, that builds their tactics around what the ocean allows rather than what their doctrine prefers, is the side that survives. So if this hypothetical engagement actually occurred, what are the most likely outcomes? Scenario 1 is contained escalation. Both sides make strong statements. Conduct shows of force, maybe exchange fire in 1 or 2 more incidents, but ultimately step back because neither wants a full-scale conflict. The United States maintains freedom of navigation operations through the strait, but with increased force protection measures. Iran continues its asymmetric harassment but calibrates it to stay below the threshold that would trigger a major American military response. This is probably the most likely outcome because both sides have reasons to avoid all-out war. Scenario 2 is the intelligence advantage reshapes the next round. One side gains such a clear picture of the other's capabilities and intentions from this engagement that they can preempt the next move. Maybe the United States uses the intelligence gathered from the Iranian boat to track down the entire Quds Force maritime network in the region. Or maybe Iran learns enough about SEAL team tactics to set a more effective trap next time. This scenario is about the cumulative effect of multiple engagements, where each one provides data that influences the next. Scenario 3 is the logistics and geography win by default. Regardless of who has better tactics or technology, the side that can sustain operations in this environment for longer eventually gains the advantage. The United States has the ability to project power into the Gulf from bases thousands of miles away, but that projection requires a massive logistics tail. Iran operates from its own coastline, with shorter supply lines but less capability to replace losses. If the conflict drags on, the question becomes whether American logistics can outlast Iranian resilience. None of these scenarios involves a decisive battle where one side clearly defeats the other. That is the nature of modern maritime conflict in contested spaces. Victory is measured in degrees, not absolutes. But we cannot analyze this scenario in isolation. What happens in the Strait of Hormuz affects oil markets, which affects global economies, which affects political stability in dozens of countries. What happens between American and Iranian forces influences relationships with regional allies like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel. What happens in this specific engagement influences Chinese and Russian calculations about how the United States responds to asymmetric challenges. So when we ask what happened after Quds Force fired first on a SEAL team, we are really asking how the United States balances multiple competing objectives: protecting its forces, maintaining freedom of navigation, avoiding a war that would be expensive and potentially catastrophic for regional stability, signaling resolve to adversaries without appearing reckless to allies, gathering intelligence without exposing sources and methods. This is why the response to a tactical incident is never purely tactical. It is always embedded in a larger strategic context where every action sends multiple signals to multiple audiences. And this is why Special Operations Forces, despite their small numbers and covert nature, can have such an outsized impact on policy. A 20-second firefight can trigger decisions that affect millions of people. The ocean is not neutral territory. It is a medium where physics, technology, doctrine, and human judgment all collide in ways that are never fully predictable. When elite forces meet in these contested waters, the outcome depends not just on who shoots first or who has better weapons, but on who understands the environment better, who has rehearsed more scenarios, who can make decisions faster under pressure, and who is willing to accept the strategic costs of their tactical choices. In this hypothetical scenario, we saw how a single engagement spirals into a complex interplay of military response, intelligence gathering, political messaging, and strategic calculation. We saw how both sides face trade-offs between protecting their forces and achieving their objectives. We saw how the ocean itself becomes a factor that complicates everything both sides are trying to do. And we saw how there are rarely clean victories in this kind of warfare. Just degrees of success, measured against costs that may not be fully understood until long after the shooting stops. So what really happened after the Quds Force fired first? The answer depends on what you measure. If you measure kinetic effects, maybe the SEAL team extracted safely and the Iranian boat was damaged. If you measure intelligence gain, maybe both sides learned valuable lessons about the other's capabilities. If you measure strategic impact, maybe the incident influenced decisions that have not yet become public. What we can say with certainty is that the maritime domain remains one of the most complex battle spaces in modern conflict, where every encounter between adversaries generates data that shapes the next encounter, where technology provides advantage but cannot eliminate uncertainty, and where the most important battles are often fought in the electromagnetic spectrum and in the minds of decision-makers rather than with guns and missiles. This video is for educational purposes only, based on publicly available information about special operations doctrine, regional security dynamics, and naval capabilities. It does not describe any actual classified operation and should not be used to plan harm or wrongdoing. If you found this analysis valuable, share your thoughts on which factor matters most in modern maritime special operations: sensor advantage, operator training, or strategic patience. In the next scenario we explore, we'll examine how submarine warfare is changing the calculus in the Arctic and why geography might matter more than technology in that frozen battle space. Thank you for watching.